Good afternoon, everyone, for whom this is an afternoon. Good morning for some people. Welcome to this CARTA webinar. Um, I will give you a very brief intro on the program that has organized this webinar and why we are here today, and then we will go on to listen from the speakers, which is the main focus of today. My name is Marta. I'm the moderator after your webinar brochure. I'm also the CARTA program manager, and I will tell you what that is right now. Okay, so CARTA is a consortium for advanced research training in Africa. It's an Africa-based, Africa-led initiative to rebuild and strengthen the capacity of African universities to train globally competitive, multidisciplinary, and internationally recognized skilled researchers and scholars in Africa. And our partners are distributed across Sub-Saharan Africa, East, West, and Southern regions. And we also have a strong network of non-African partners across Europe, the US, and Latin America, who make the consortium. Sorry, my throat is a bit not in the best shape, so please bear with me. A strong network of non-African partners that make the consortium even stronger. The theory of change of the program is anchored in, it's aiming at having African public universities becoming centers of research excellence, impacting society, and we work under the assumption that we have to work not only with the individuals to create a critical mass of African researchers, but with the institutions where they work to ensure that they have research supportive and responsive institutions where they can stay and work and perform as research leaders. In general, it's a pipeline model where we work under the assumption that if we have strong, skilled early career researchers, that then we support to establish research teams that find that conducive training and research environment in their institutions, and quality research and engagement will happen. They will become research leaders, and this will then reinforce this virtuous cycle and pipeline model in which those institutions will become a place where more skilled early career researchers are trained. The current strategy is focused on 4 areas: maintaining the pipeline of high quality early career researchers, enhancing the engagement of the CARTA community with society, creating research hubs, and creating research conducive environments at partner institutions. I will not go through all the details. I will only mention a couple of things. So for the first strategic objective with the early career researchers, we offer fellowships and awards for PhDs and postdocs, and also training, which is complementary to their institutional PhD training. And at postdoc level, we offer grant writing workshops, and we focus on strengthening that research leadership capacity that we have mentioned earlier. And in this aspect, in this sense, we have already given more than 245 PhD fellowships. Of those, 170 have already graduated. We have a very high retention rate and very good completion time in average, and we are very proud of doing this with a very good gender distribution. And since there's no time today, I will just invite you to visit our website and see what we do, our CARTA gender position, how we do things, so that hopefully we create this environment where female early career researchers are also thriving. And related to today's webinar, our fellows have produced more than 3,900 peer-reviewed articles, and you can visit our CARTA evidence website to see more details, and secure more than 30 million in external grants. So we are very proud of what they have done. I will not mention more of other objectives, but just to again mention the Kata Evidence website where you can find all the applications by our fellows, see where they're publishing, which topics they are covering, and which areas of expertise they represent. And then just to introduce today's speakers, I'm guessing or assuming that most of you may be familiar or have encountered similar statements like this one on my slide, where it says that Africa accounts for 12.5% of the population, but produces less than 1% of the global research output. But you're probably less familiar with data like this that shows that most of the funders giving funding for Africa, for research on Africa, actually are funding non-African institutions and therefore non-African researchers. So in the case of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example, this was around 10% of the direct grantees of funding for Africa are actually African institutions. Now, this poses a competitive disadvantage because if you're not the one securing the funding, you're probably not the one publishing. We're not going to enter into the whole conundrum of factors that leads to all these things, but there's also an issue of visibility. Now, in this associated to this competitive disadvantage, African researchers may be publishing in places that don't have the visibility that other international outlets do have. And therefore, even if there is a bit more research than that 1% that most sources mention, it's not findable, so it doesn't count. But then there's also an aspect, and that's what we are addressing today here, of being skilled at navigating the international publishing ecosystem so that the science that is being produced, the research that is being done, can actually come out in outlets that are visible internationally. And that's why we are here. And I'm going to introduce the first speaker, Matthew Smaldon, who is executive publisher at Elsevier and has over 25 years of experience working in academic publishing for international publishing companies. He is currently the executive publisher responsible for Elsevier's health studies portfolio of journals, which includes social science and medicine, SSM, population health, mental health, qualitative research in health, health systems, and then well-being, space and society, health and place. So Matthew, I just stop sharing on my end and welcome.
Thank you very much. I will just bring up my slides now. So bear with me one moment. So can everybody?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for the introduction, Marta, and hello, everybody. My name is Matt Smaldon. I'm an executive publisher with Elsevier. I will be going through the presentation today and sharing the responsibilities presenting with Susan Elliott. Susan is also the editor-in-chief of Social Science and Medicine and Wellbeing, Space and Society. And so I'm going to start the presentation with an introduction to the journals. The ones on the screen now are all part of the Social Science and Medicine family of journals. And Social Science and Medicine is one of our key journals. It's a very well established, very well respected journal. And Susan's been the editor for the last nearly 2 years, but has been involved with the journal for 10 years prior to that as one of the editors of one of the offices. When people submit to social science and medicine, authors have to choose an office in our submission system to submit the paper to. And so you can see that there are 7 offices here, all have their own focus areas, but each of them also do have one or more associated journals, which are part of our wider family. And so social science and medicine is a very high impact journal, has very high criteria requirements for the papers that it publishes. And the expanded family of journals tend to publish papers which may be a little bit more niche, which may have slightly less impact, but are still very good quality papers. So what happens when people submit to SSM? They choose the office for their paper to go to, but sometimes, and we'll talk about this a little later, people are offered a transfer to another journal as well, because we want to ensure that authors find a place for their paper. So Social Science and Medicine itself launched in 1967. It's a hybrid title, which means that it publishes open access and subscription papers. We get a lot of submissions every year. You can see the overall numbers here from 2023. The highest submitting country for us is China. And the highest accepting country in terms of where the papers come from is the US. That has been the case for a little while, but things are changing there as well. We're getting more papers coming from many different countries. And so we do get submissions from, I think, virtually every country in the world has submitted to SSM, or researchers in those countries have over the years. The impact factor is 4.9, and its site score is 9.1, and I've talked about the offices and the structure. So that's a very brief introduction to the journal itself. In terms of submissions from Africa, last year we received 164 submissions. This year to date, we've received 147. So we're probably going to be looking around about the same number, maybe slightly more by the end of this year. These are the countries and the numbers of submissions received so far. So you can see there's representation from a large number of countries here. And so this may also be somebody on the call today, may be one of the authors who has submitted, but you can see it's a very widespread distribution of papers. Now, in terms of acceptances, we accepted 11 papers from Africa last year. This year to date, it's 16. So you can see that numbers, while they're still modest, are going up. So again, looking ahead towards the end of the year, we may be double or certainly close to it in terms of the number of accepted papers. And where those accepted papers are coming from, you can see here the long list there. So there are obviously some countries where we haven't accepted papers, but there are others, and it's quite a diverse list again, where we are increasingly accepting papers as well. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the types of journals that are available for you to submit to. The two types which Elsevier publishes are hybrid journals and open access journals. And I will be talking about Elsevier here, but this is relevant to all publishers as well. So the vast majority of academic journals are hybrid journals. So these are journals where there is the choice to publish open access, where there is normally a fee, an article publishing charge, or APC, that needs to be paid, or via the subscription route, which is free of charge for the author. If people are publishing down the subscription route, we do offer embargo periods. After that embargo period, people can share their paper freely, and that's called green open access. And there's information about this on journal homepages. But if they are choosing to publish open access, they will be selecting a license, so a Creative Commons license to be appended to their paper. We do have institutional agreements where there may be reduced rates or full waivers for publishing in open access open access and hybrid journals. There's information about this on journal homepages and on publishers' pages as well. So this is something which I would recommend you check carefully when you're considering a journal to submit to. So it should be very clear and transparent whether this is a journal which accepts only open access papers or it accepts open access and subscription model journal. So there are also Gold Open Access journals, and Gold Open Access journal is a journal which only publishes papers which are open access. There will be an article processing or publishing charge, an APC, to publish in these journals. However, a number of journals will have reduced rates based on location or based on the institutional agreement that I touched on earlier. Elsevier has a number of journals which are open access journals which are offering either deeply discounted rates or full waivers based on location of authors. And quite often, new launch titles will be waiving APCs or offering discounted rates. There is also the Research for Life organization that Elsevier and other publishers are members of, and that offers authors in low and middle income countries an opportunity to publish with either a waived APC or a reduced rate in Gold Open Access journals. There are reasons why people publish in Gold Open Access journals. Obviously, if it's open access, there is no limit to anybody accessing the paper. It's freely available and it's permanently available for anybody to access, which does mean that the readership can be considerably higher. Sometimes it is going to come down to personal preference. Sometimes it will come down to funder mandates. So some funders mandate that any research output is published Gold Open Access. Sometimes that has to be in a Gold Open Access journal. Sometimes it can be in a hybrid journal, but that will depend on the funder requirement. So I'm going to move on to a few things that you might want to consider when you're thinking about where to submit your paper. So there are some best practices which we would suggest you consider. Thinking about where is the best place to publish your article to ensure that it reaches the intended audience. Well, it's not a suggestion, it's really a very strong recommendation that you only submit to one journal at a time. We do have software, all publishers do, which monitors this. Occasionally, editors will be alerted that people have submitted to more than one journal at a time, and that is not allowed. And so that will lead to papers being desk rejected. Supervisors and colleagues can provide suggestions about where you might want to think about publishing. And obviously looking at your reference list of the papers that you've written yourselves will give you some suggestions. We recommend that you think about shortlisting a handful of candidate journals and then investigating them further, because some journals will have different policies and requirements, and I'll come on to those in a moment. It's always a very good idea to read the aims and scope and the guide for authors of the journals that you're interested in submitting a paper to. This may seem quite obvious, but we do see, and Susan will talk about this, a lot of papers which are submitted which are actually outside of the scope of our journals, and they will get desk rejected. The aims and scope will outline the sort of papers that will be considered, both topic and content and article types. The guide for authors provides more practical information on how to prepare and submit your manuscript. So it will include information on things like word lengths, information on required data to be provided, like ethics statements and things along those lines. So you should take a look at both the aims and scope and the guide for authors when you're considering where to submit. Social Science and Medicine publishes these type of articles. So there's 4 types of manuscripts that the journal consider: full-length articles, which are up to 9,000 words, Reviews, which are up to 1,500 words, short communications between 2,000 and 4,000 words, and commentaries, which are invited, normally only invited. Occasionally, we do receive de novo submissions there, but they normally will be done in consultation with an editor. Different journals will consider different types of papers. So this is something which you should take a close look at when considering a journal to submit to. It's a good idea to take a look at recent articles that have been published. So again, this is a screenshot from Social Science and Medicine. Other journals have a similar sort of information on their homepages. So you can see here that there's latest published articles, but also articles in press, top cited, most downloaded, and so on. So this will give you an idea of what sort of papers have been published in the journal recently, and you should hopefully be able to find similar papers to the one which you're intending to submit. Metrics are certainly something to take a look at. Impact factor and site score are the two main journal metrics, and they will give you an indication on how many times papers have been cited on average in a given year. However, I would strongly suggest that this is looked at as a general guidance, but it shouldn't be a sole reason to select a journal. There will be cases where journal impact factors are high and they drop, and there may be reasons behind that. And you should be looking at this alongside lots of other indicators of suitability for your research in terms of a place to publish. So other things to ask yourself, well, we've talked about some of these already. You know, who is the journal's audience? Or publish your paper. This information should be available on the journal homepages. If you've got a piece of research which is very timely, you might want to think about how long it will take before this paper is considered. Susan will probably touch on things like how long it takes to get a first decision with social science and medicine, but that's something you might want to think about. It's worth checking to see if the journal is running any special issues and whether they are open for submissions, because that might be a perfect place for your paper. We've talked about open access. I will talk about this website briefly, but I'll share it again a little later. We know that there are, unfortunately, what are known as predatory publishers who are preying on authors, encouraging them to submit to their journals and normally taking a fee for that. And these journals don't always even exist. So there's a website which you can have a look at, Think, Check, Submit, which will give you an indication of whether a journal actually exists, whether it has got an ISSN, whether it's indexed, and so on. So if you're not sure about a journal, or if you're concerned, it's worth having a look at this website, which is completely free to use, and it will hopefully help you there. And then one of the other things, last things, is to see whether the journal's actually offering any prizes or promotions at the moment. So some journals offer early career researcher paper prizes. Some will do awards for authors from certain regions and so on. This is something to also take a look at, because that might be an advantage when you're thinking about where to submit. Elsevier has a tool called Journal Finder, which is a free tool, which you can use. You can upload your paper title and abstract and any keywords, and it will make recommendations on which journals are suitable for your paper. This is looking at the aims and scope, but also looking at things like previously published papers where it matches keywords to content which has already been published by the to use. Other publishers have a similar tool. So the Elsevier one looks at Elsevier journals, but other publishers like Wiley, etc., have their own tool that you may also want to take a look at. So I'm going to stop there and pass over to Susan. Are you happy to continue, Susan? I think we might have had a question, actually.
I'm very happy to continue. You looking at the chat? You can post your questions in the Q&A. Okay, that's all the chat says. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Right, I will move the slides forward for you then.
Perfect. Okay, so peer review process. Go ahead, Matt. Yeah. I'm just going to provide a couple of opening comments first before I do this. So CARTA is an organization that is very near and dear to my heart. So I did for a while sit on the non-African partner group for CARTA and on the board of management. I'm currently at the University of Waterloo in Canada. So it's very early in the morning for where I am. So thank you, Matt, for starting us off. Not only was it a very useful foundation, it gave me a chance to eat my breakfast. And as an individual researcher, so I'm a medical geographer by training, I look primarily at relationships between environment and health. Pardon me. And I do a lot of research in Sub-Saharan Africa. I work a lot in Kenya and Uganda, also Ghana and Tanzania, as well as parts of Southeast Asia and Latin America. I'm particularly proud that in December of this year, I'm being inducted as a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. That's not to brag, that's just to give an indication of my commitment to the amazing research that is happening in Sub-Saharan Africa. And when I first became interested in this position of being editor-in-chief of Social Science and Medicine and was interviewed for the position, I made it very clear that this was one of my goals, that I want to change that 1%, because I know firsthand the great research that's happening in Sub-Saharan Africa, and I want to see it have a role to play. My objective at the end of this webinar is that all of these 125 people who are on the webinar, and maybe those who will see it after, will be able to say, I know the editor-in-chief of Social Science and Medicine. I know the editor-in-chief, and I know that the editor-in-chief is committed to publishing our work. That work still has to be good. It still has to meet the bar, but I know that there's an editor of a very large international journal that's very committed to making sure that our amazing research gets published. So that's where I want to end up today. So good journal selection, using us as an example. One of the advantages that Social Science and Medicine brings is that we have an extended word length, right? So about 8,000 words. That's much longer than a lot of the other journals that you will look at that have 3,000 words, 4,000 words, 5,000 is even considered long. One of the reasons we do that is because we want the work that you submit to be contextualized, theorized within social science theory, right? And so I know the types of people who are on this webinar. So if I say, you know, Nancy Krieger, who's the social epidemiologist at Harvard, who wrote Epidemiology and the People's Health, now out in second edition, said, without theory, observation is blind and explanation is impossible. And so that's the kind of work that we're looking for in social science and medicine. So, and, you know, Matt indicated earlier, some people will actually submit papers to the journal that do not meet our aims and scope. And it's a bit of a struggle for me, because I think, have you read papers in our journal? Are you citing any papers from this journal in your bibliography? Because they will submit papers that don't have a social science context or theorization for their work, as well as papers that are not focused on health. So social science and medicine, we focus on social science research, areas of common interest to social scientists that are looking at a wide range of social science disciplines, including anthropology, economics, epidemiology, geography, health policy, psychology, and sociology. What's really important here too is to think about the office to which you are submitting. And we are working hard all the time to make sure that those office descriptions are quite comprehensive. But I will say that, you know, sometimes if you submit to the wrong office, you may get a desk reject very quickly, because you haven't thought about, you know, what's the best match for your paper. And the senior editors of those offices are trained in those disciplines. So in medical anthropology, they're medical anthropologists. And if it's not an anthropology focus, then, you know, they're going to do a desk reject. Just want to highlight the health policy office as well, because this happens a lot, at least my experience in my editor-in-chief role. People will submit to the health policy office because their work has policy implications. or applications, but it's not a health policy analysis. So think about that when you're choosing an office. Maybe my work has health policy implications or applications, but it's actually not a health policy analysis. It's actually something in the area of economic health or social epidemiology or something like that. But yes, of course, it has policy implications, but it's not a health policy analysis. So keep that one in mind. Go ahead, Matt. So is it health? And this sounds trite or kind of obvious to say out loud. But what's really fascinating to me is that some people will still to this day, we get submissions. This journal is about 60 years old now. We still get submissions that don't have a link to health. Now, that sounds incredulous almost. But even most recently, a young colleague of mine who I helped train, I was on her PhD committee, who's now at a university in another country, was shocked that her paper was desk rejected from social science and medicine. And the first thing I said to her was, why didn't you ask me? You know, I'm the editor in chief. You know me. We're connected on Facebook Messenger, for crying out loud. Why didn't you ask me? Her paper was desk rejected because the relationship to the issue she was studying and health was not made explicit. And she said, I just assumed that they would understand that there's a relationship to health here. But we can't assume, right? We have to make it explicit, not implicit. And it sounds very obvious and straightforward, but make sure there is that health component to it. And I think most of the people on this call are in that area. Next slide. General and international interest. So there are some issues, and I'm gonna draw from my own experience and my own examples, because they're the ones that I know best. But I live in Canada, and I know that one of the major health issues that we deal with in this country is in our Indigenous population. And I get a lot of papers to the journal. We get a lot of papers to the journal about the health issues for our Indigenous population in Canada. And it's very difficult for me to reject those papers because, you know, it pulls at my heartstrings. This is my country. This is my people. But sometimes those things that are of most importance to your own country and your own people are not important to the rest of the world. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't make those links to what's happening in the rest of the world. But what's really important is to always remember that this journal has an international readership. As Matt said, we have had papers submitted from virtually every country in the world. So when you're writing your paper about a health social science issue that's happening in Sub-Saharan Africa, think about, for example, that person in Thailand or that person in Sweden who's reading the journal. And what about that is going to be of interest to them? And again, I can say this with impunity because I do work on Canadian health populations, or the health of Canadian populations, health issues in Sub-Saharan Africa, health issues in Southeast Asia, Latin America. There are always results that are transferable, maybe not generalizable, but transferable. There are things that we can learn from those other populations. And so to my SSA colleagues, one of the things I would encourage very strongly is to think about, who, as Matt started initially, who is the audience and how can I write a compelling story for that audience? So thinking about what is the story that you're sharing and how will that be of interest to someone in Thailand, Hong Kong, Sweden, Sub-Saharan Africa, the United States, and so on. Next slide, please. One of the things that we look for in the journal is, are you telling us something that we didn't already know? That is really on the author or the authorship team to make very clear. This paper fills this gap in the literature. This paper fills this gap in our knowledge. Sometimes we can't tell, and we'll send it out to review, and the reviewers will say there's absolutely nothing new in this paper. This has been done 1,000 times before. You know, there's nothing new here. So it really is up to the authors and the authorship team to tell us what's new. Sometimes we know this has been done. So we would in that case look to see if, well, maybe there's not something, you know, really brand spanking new here, but it's a solid piece of research. It's using really good data. It's well theorized. It's really well presented. It's telling a compelling story. And maybe it's, you know, not terrifically new, but it's working in an area that's understudied, or it's working with a population that's understudied. In which case, we might not send it out for review in social science and medicine, but we might transfer to one of the family of journals like social science and medicine, population health, for example. So we look for pieces that are contributing something new, but we also look for pieces that are analytical, not descriptive. And this is particularly so in the context of reviews, right? So a lot of times we will get, here's a review of the literature about X, Y, Z. Reviews of the literature are actually very useful. However, even those reviews need to be analytical and systematic. So that if I get a review that comes to me, immediately I will look to the section that should say methodology and reference to, you know, using the Prisma guidelines, doing a systematic review of the literature with a very clear methodology, perhaps the involvement of a university librarian in that review, as well as perhaps some software like Covidence. And if you haven't heard of the software Covidence, Covidence, strongly encourage you to Google that for when you're doing a systematic review of the literature. So analytical, not descriptive, even if it's a review. And you know, making a new contribution, and it really does behoove the author or authorship team to make that clear. And I would say make that clear in the abstract. Next slide. The quality of the paper. Yeah, I mean, I could go on forever about this, but I just want to share a few things. If it's not in scope, you know, if it's not contextualized within social science theory, if it doesn't deal with health, it'll likely be rejected without review. We call that a desk reject. And on the front page of every journal's website will be numbers like this: days to first decision, days to publication, days to going to press, all those kinds of things. And so we have about 20 days, which is less than 3 weeks. I want to just pause there for a second, because when I became the editor-in-chief, I took over on January 1st of 2023. And on that very first day, January 1st, first day of a brand new life for me, new year, the first thing I had to do was blacklist an author. That was because of redundant publication. That was because we discovered that there was an author who submitted their paper to 2 different journals at the same time with malicious intent. It wasn't an accident. We did an investigation. And I always encourage you not just to think about ethics in publication, but also integrity. Because if you get blacklisted, you know, it means you can't submit to our journal anymore. And it's very, very sad, because it means there was some malicious intent. There are some situations where it happens and it's a mistake and we can deal with that. But I just want to underscore the fact that, as Matt said, and this is how I mentor my own postdocs, my own graduate students, always come up with a little short list of journals. This is the one we're going to go to first. We're going to go to Social Science and Medicine because it's a top journal. It's international readership. It's going to get a lot of citations. Let's go there first. And I know if I submit to Social Science and Medicine within less than 3 weeks, I'm going to get that first decision. I'm going to know whether or not my paper went out for review or whether or not maybe it was outside aims and scope or whatever. So I'm going to find out very quickly. There's really no reason to ever submit your paper to more than one journal at one time. Because if you're submitting to a good journal, you will get a very quick decision. And sometimes we submit to journals, my students will submit to journals that are like, there's no way this journal is going to take my paper, but I'm going to try because I know within 7 days, 10 days, 20 days, I'm going to get an answer. So you will find out very, very quickly if your paper will get a desk reject or go out for review. I was going to save this to the end, but I will say that we have a very, very high rejection rate at Social Science and Medicine. It's around 85, 86% of papers get rejected. Very good journals like Social Science and Medicine have very, very high rejection rates. So if you see that your paper's gone out for review, that's a win right there. Let's go to the next slide, Matt. Yeah. Okay, so when you submit your paper, this is the site that you see. I don't think we need to talk more about that. And this is just an example of what I see or what the editors see when they submit their papers. I'm just going to move this over to my monitor because it's a bit small for me to see. Can you make that a little bit bigger, Matt, at all? If not, it's okay. So your paper's there. This gives us all of the information that we need, and we can make a decision about, are we going to send it out for review? Is it within aims and scope, and so on. Next slide. All right, so you submit your paper to the journal. It's screened by the editorial team. Does it get sent out for review or not? Does it meet the aims and scope? It's doing something new. Is it presented well? Does it have international appeal? If it does, we send it out for reviewers. And I want to pause here because there's something in the process that a lot of people overlook, and I think it's worth spending a minute on. And that is when you submit your paper to any journal, you will be given an opportunity to suggest reviewers. And my experience is that a lot of people don't take this seriously, and this is a missed opportunity. They either don't take it seriously, or again, I want to come back to this issue of ethics versus integrity. They don't take it seriously, so they flippantly throw a couple of names in there that don't make any sense. Finding reviewers for papers is the hardest job of an editor. The hardest job. And so if you can help us do our job, that's a win for you because it's going to make things go more quickly. Take the time to think and do a little bit of research about who would be a good reviewer for your paper. Not only who would be a good reviewer for this paper, but who do you want to know about your work? Because you are all on a track, on a personnel track, right? And so, is there someone in your sphere of research, a researcher whose work you follow, whose work you want to contribute to or build on, and you want them to know about the work that you've done? And perhaps, at some point you might need a reference letter for tenure or promotion or whatever, or a grant. And so, you want these people to know your work. So spend the time to think about who would be good reviewers. And I think we accept up to 5 in the submission process. And we will always use 1 or 2 if they're good. Because as I said, finding reviewers is the hardest thing that we do. And if you can find reviewers that you think would be a good reviewer for your paper, the likelihood of them accepting that review invitation and therefore, moving your paper through the system more quickly is better. But I want to come back to this issue of ethics versus integrity, because the other side of that coin is you must, with integrity, suggest reviewers that we call arm's length. And in a lot of cases, people will submit papers to me when I was the senior editor for medical geography, and I would know who the candidate was who was submitting the paper. And I would see the names of the people they suggested as reviewers, and I knew they were grad students together or from the same department in the same university. And so I wouldn't use any of their reviewers. So this is a lost opportunity if you don't think really clearly about who can be a reviewer for you and suggest some really good names. Don't just treat this as because I see this all the time. I'm finally submitting my paper. I'm so excited. I just want to get it in before the end of the day, and I want to walk away and forget about it for a while while it's out there. I'm not going to take the time to do the research about who might be a good reviewer for my paper. Do take the time. I think that's a very important step. Next one. Okay. And then we get the reviewer's comments back and an editorial decision is made. So I want to pause here again because I want to say a couple of things about the reviewer's comments. I always tell the people that I'm mentoring, because that's the other thing I do within Carta is I mentor, is if you get to revise and resubmit, that's the best outcome you could possibly imagine. I'm a bit older, a bit more senior as a researcher. I have a fairly extensive CV. Only once in my life have I ever had a paper that was accepted on the first round. Only once. It's a very rare thing. So if you get a revise and resubmit, that's a win. Remember, our rejection rate is 86%. Many of the top journals that you'll go to will have similar rejection rates. So if you get a revise and resubmit, that's absolutely brilliant. In my mentoring world, I work a lot at this stage because it's really easy to get disheartened, to get disappointed, to give up at this stage because sometimes reviewers are very direct, very blunt, bordering on harsh sometimes. I, as an editor, I actually will read through the reviewer's comments to make sure that they're being critical, but also being constructive. And sometimes, they say some things that maybe aren't very nice. So take those reviewers' comments in the spirit in which they're given. Those reviewers' comments, if they wanted to reject your paper, they would have rejected it. They haven't rejected it. They've said, there's something good here, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And maybe that list goes up to 112. Take the time to distill those comments and to respond to them. I want to say 2 things here. The better your response to reviewers' comments, the easier the job is for the editor. So I mentor my folks. When we do a response to reviewers, it can be up to 25 or 30 pages long. Because what we will do is we will take each comment in turn. We will express our gratitude to that reviewer. We will express whether we agree or disagree. You don't have to agree with everything. And then we will say, and this is how we addressed your comment. We did the following things. The manuscript now reads this on this page in this paragraph, and here's the text cut and paste here for you. So that the editor could actually go through your response to reviewers and see, oh, they did a really good job. They've addressed all these comments. There was this one spot where they said, no, I don't think I should do that kind of analysis, but this is why, and here's the references I'm bringing to support my case. So taking the time to do a really good response to reviewers makes a difference, and I'll tell you why. Making the job of the editor as easy as possible. That's what you want to do. Secondly, I have seen response to reviewers where it's just, an overall cover letter, 2 paragraphs that say, thanks for the reviewer comments. We addressed them in the attached manuscript. So I have no idea what you've done, whether you agree or disagree with all of those 112 comments that you got, how you address them. Did you do it well? So the first thing that I will do as the editor is I will say, well, I can't judge this. I need to send it back to the original reviewers. And now I've just added 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks to the process. Whereas with a really strong response to reviewers' comments, there may be a situation where I feel it needs to go back to the reviewers. There are some times, for example, where an initial review will be a reject. I might have a reject, a major, and a minor. That is not an unusual situation. But sometimes somebody will choose reject, but then I read through the comments and they're not reject type comments. There's not a fatal flaw. There's not a fundamental flaw. And so I will send it back to that reviewer to say, you said reject initially. This authorship team made these revisions and it now looks like this. Can you have another look at it? And they will. And many, many times they'll come back and say, wow, they did a really good job. I think it can go to publication now. So those two boxes, although they seem simple, that's where you want to spend a lot of your time and do a lot of research. And engage your peers and colleagues. I know within CARTA, you have amazing mentorship programs. I know because I'm part of one. Have other people read it over. Engage other people. Say, who do you think would be good reviewers for this paper? Talk to your supervisor, talk to your peers, talk to your colleagues. So these are really, really important parts of this process. And the last thing that I want to say is, I told you at the beginning, one of my objectives of doing webinars like this with CARTA and others is so that you now 126 people can say, I know the editor-in-chief of Social Science and Medicine. So you can reach out. Now, one of the things we do not do is pre-screen papers. You cannot send an abstract and say, what do you think? Do you think it's a good fit? We don't do that because there would just, we wouldn't be able to do our day jobs. But when you get a revise and resubmit and you're told you have X number of days to get your revisions in, and I know, or the senior editor knows, you've got a lot of other things on your plate. You've got a heavy teaching load. You've got a heavy administrative load. You're doing your PhD part-time while you're also teaching courses. You may also have family responsibilities and other responsibilities. Maybe you can't make that timeline. So you say, no, nope, sorry. I can't make that timeline. So I'm not going to do the revise and resubmit. Reach out and ask for an extension. 99 times out of 100, we will grant an extension. So always reach out. Always ask. Even if you get 3/4 of the way there and you just say, you know what, something's happened, I need 3 more weeks, ask for it. Don't hesitate to ask for it. And 99 times out of 100, you're actually going to be asking the editorial assistant for the office and not the editor. Okay, so I spent a lot of time on that, but I think that those are really important boxes. The final editorial decision, I will say, reject, minor revisions. I don't know why we don't have major revisions, minor revisions, major revisions, accept or reject. The difference between minor and major implication for the author or the authorship team is the number of days you have to respond to the revisions. I forget what the numbers are, Matt will know, but you get a few extra days if it's major revisions. But again, I just want to underscore that. Don't hesitate to reach out to the editorial office and ask. This is regardless of journal, not just our journal. I do it too. All of a sudden, I'll get a revise and resubmit. I've got one now. I was given 2 weeks. And I said, 2 weeks is not enough time because I'm not first author. The first author is a very young graduate student, first-year master's student. I could take it over. I could do the revisions. I could get it in 2 weeks, but that student's not going to learn anything out of that process. And so I ask for 6 weeks so that we can go through an iterative process of capacity building. And so that the student doesn't just do it and get it in, the student actually learns from the process. And they said, yes. Well, actually, we compromised. I think I asked for 6 weeks and I got 4. So there you go. I think I'm done with that one. I want to make sure we've got time for questions if we want to go on. Right, so this is just how peer review works. If you suggest reviewers, I'll probably use 1 or 2. Usually sent to a minimum of 2 reviewers, and that may sound like, oh, you only need 2 reviewers, but we actually might have to send it to 20 people before we get 2 to accept. If we see diversity or too much variation in the reviews I mentioned earlier, it's not unusual to get a reject, a minor, and a major. Or even a reject a minor and a reject, a minor, and a major. But if I get a reject and a minor, I will immediately say to my editorial assistant, can you get me a third review on this? And that will take a little bit of extra time, but it helps me make that decision. Our journals are a combination of single or double anonymized peer review. So social science medicine is double anonymized. So your reviewers don't know who you are and you don't know who the reviewers are. And you can find out more information on the process if you go to our website. Next slide. These are all the things that a reviewer is asked to consider. And, I also just want to say that we are always looking for good reviewers as well. And so to become part of our reviewer pool, we also have tremendous resources on the site, on the Elsevier site, that help you understand the review process, the peer review process. There's videos, how to be a good peer reviewer. And, once we get you into that process, the other thing we're constantly looking for is new editorial board members. One of the things we have right now is an early career editorial board for health in place and well-being, space, and society. So we're always looking for good editors and always looking for good editorial board members. So I'll just plant that seed with Carta and with you. Very basic, straightforward things. But what I look for in the reviewers' comments back to me is that very, very first couple of sentences, which typically says, this is a really interesting paper about XYZ. Nobody's ever done XYZ before, or no one's ever done it in this part of the world before, or they use an innovative methodology to do this. Something in the beginning that says, this is really cool. But in order to make this a publishable paper, they have to address the following things. And I really, really appreciate our reviewers because some of them are so comprehensive, so in-depth. It's very, very useful. Next slide. Tips to help you get published or not be desk rejected. Yeah, every paper needs a peg to hang it on. So I'm currently teaching undergraduates right now this term at second year level and fourth year level about how to do research and just getting across these very simple ideas. What's the gap? What are you doing that no one else has done before? And as I said earlier, clearly identify that, put it right in that abstract. Some people forget about abstracts and how important they are. When you've got a busy editor who's getting, 500 papers a week, sometimes they don't make it beyond your abstract. So make sure that you spend a lot of time on that abstract. The things that as authors we think are not terrifically important are the things that are terrifically important to the editor who's reviewing your paper. One paper, 1 point. Yeah, try not to do too much in one paper. I assume we're going to share these slides so you can look at those things. Avoid writing a report rather than a paper. This is really important, especially for early career researchers who are coming out of their PhD and thinking, oh, I think I will, publish my literature review as a paper in a journal. And it comes to the editor and it reads like a literature review from a PhD dissertation. There are tremendous resources out there. There's a wonderful book called How to Write Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks. There's a little red book on how to write in the social sciences that I buy copies of every year for all my new grad students. And when they give me stuff to read, I say, have you read the little red book yet? Because if you haven't, I'm not reading your chapter or your paper. There are, academic writing is a very different style of writing. And when I'm first starting out, the student I mentioned earlier, who had just finished his fourth year and is now in his first year master's, the first thing I say is go and find a journal article that you really like, that really speaks to you, that teaches you something, but is written in a very comprehensive way, and use it as an example. Next slide, please. What is your contribution? contribution can be substantive. We found this out. Nobody's ever done this before. It can be theoretical. We've developed a new theory. We have used this theory in a different context. It can be policy, can be practice. It could or should be some combination of those things. But make sure that you identify that the author identifies it, and that it's in the abstract. Next slide. Mistakes, not doing those things we've just said that are really, really important to do. The discussion, yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I know that in some disciplines, this is the really interesting thing about working across disciplines. In some disciplines, results and discussion get mixed together. In most disciplines, results are results, discussion is discussion, but discussion is not restatement of the results. Discussion is actually taking those results and putting them back into the context of the literature that you used as the foundation for your piece. Next slide. Yeah, not being aware of journal policies. I want to come back to this issue of ethics versus integrity. We do not publish anything that does not have ethics approval. And especially for people like me working in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's getting quite rightly much more complex. When I first started working, I could get ethics approval from my own university, and that was enough. Now that's not enough. I need to get ethics approval from my own university, from a local university in the country within which I'm working, and then from the national ethics authorities. That's in most countries in SSA, Kenya, Uganda, and so on. And it's really important to tell us that you've got ethics approval, where, why, and how. We will not publish your paper without ethics approval, full stop. The other is that, there's a lot of amazing software packages now. And when a paper gets submitted, we use cross-check, authenticate, all these things that tell us what exists out there already. Is it a duplicate submission? How much of this is already published out there? We have just made a new policy about preprints. I'm not a huge fan of preprints, but we do allow preprints. The exceptions to this are, in many cases, when you've published your PhD dissertation, it gets put up, on a university website or whatever. In that case, we accept that, or if there's an abstract at a conference and there's overlap. But yeah, I think I've actually talked mostly about this, Matt. I talked about that too. I was anticipating these slides. Don't throw a paper away if it's rejected. Yeah, if a paper is rejected, don't throw it away. Use those comments that you get to strengthen that paper and think about where else you can send it. We do have this wonderful article transfer service that allows us to, if we think that a paper is good, but it's just not social science and medicine, we can offer you a transfer to one of our family of journals. And then all you have to do is, accept that transfer. So that does exist. Things to be aware of with ethics. I may have mentioned most of these, but let's see what we get.
I'll pick up it from here, Susan, if that's okay. So I'll cover the next few slides. I'm just aware of the time, so
yeah,
I'm going to move through these reasonably rapidly. So yeah, thank you very much for those for the slides there, Susan, for covering that. With ethics, this is something which all publishers take very, very seriously. And it's something which we are looking at very closely. There are three main areas where ethical misconduct occurs: fabrication, so the making up of research data; falsification, so the manipulation of existing research data; and plagiarism, so taking somebody else's work and claiming it as your own. When a paper is identified as having a problem, an ethical issue, so this example is plagiarism, papers can be retracted. Sometimes papers are retracted for good reason, and authors honestly come in and say, I realized there was an error and my findings are not correct. There will always be a reason for retraction. So when a paper is retracted, it is not removed from a journal website. It's still there, but it will have a notice saying retracted, like this. And like I said, there will be a reason for it. And if the reason is plagiarism, it will say that is the reason why the paper is being retracted. If it's an honest mistake or error, that will be stated as well. We have a generative AI policy. I'm not going to go through every single bit of information on the page, but basically, to summarize, if an author has used generative AI in the writing process, they need to declare it. It should be used for readability and language improvement, and it should be applied with human oversight and control. The reason being is that ChatGPT and other tools can produce authoritative sounding material, but it's actually biased or it's incomplete, incorrect, and sometimes it actually doesn't make sense. The words are correct, but they don't make sense. So anytime it's being used, it needs human oversight and it needs to be disclosed. So we ask people to indicate whether they've used generative AI or AI-assisted technologies when they've submitted or written the paper. And they should not list ChatGPT or any other tool as a co-author or cite it as an author. We do have, like I said, a point within the submission process where authors are asked to disclose this. And there's information in all journal guide for authors. This is something which is happening all publishers. So many publishers are introducing similar policies. And I was just clarify that this relates to the writing process. It doesn't relate to the actual research process, and individual universities may have their own policies on that. We don't permit the use of generative AI or AI-assisted tools to create or generate or alter images in manuscripts. We do have software tools which are applied to check for this. It isn't something which really impacts us so much in the social science area. It is more in the life science area, for example, but we do check for this and it's not permitted. The only exception here is that when it's used as part of a research design. So just those are the two sort of like approaches which we've got, but this is a changing area. It is something that policies are being updated. So I strongly suggest that when you're looking at submitting a paper to a journal, it's worth looking at the Guide for Authors, which will contain information on any generative AI policies. I touched on this earlier. This is the website that I mentioned, Think, Check, Submit. This is where you can go to check to see whether journals are legitimate and actually exist. We're also aware that there are companies who will reach out to authors promising that they will get a paper published in a journal or they will get a paper published very quickly. No third party can promise that. All papers that are submitted to reputable journals are considered by editors and reviewers, and there is no guarantees at any point about getting a paper published. So if anybody does offer that service, it should be looked at with a lot of caution. So there are some resources that I wanted to share with you. I've touched on Journal Finder already, so I'm not going to explain that one again. But Susan mentioned this. Researcher Academy is an online platform which is available free of charge. You just need to register to use it, and it is basically a training tool. There are different modules which cover all stages of the publication process, including peer review, how to write your paper, and so on. These are all completely free. You can sign up and register these and go through them at your own speed and pace. This is Elsevier's version. Again, other publishers do have their own versions of this. So it's worth having a look to see what's available. And you may be able to find a number of courses which are of interest and suitable for you. Something else which you may be aware of, but sometimes we do get queries about this from authors and they're not aware. A lot of universities, well, some universities, I'm not going to say a lot, but universities do offer copy editing services. This is an example from the University of Rwanda where there is academic writing support available. Quite often these will be organized through libraries, but it's worth checking with your individual institution what support is available. And quite often this will be helping with language if things need to be checked, but there may be additional things. I'm aware of some universities where papers can't be submitted until they've gone through an internal service like this. So it's worth checking to see what is available at your individual institutions. I briefly mentioned Research for Life earlier in the context of open access and waivers and discounts, but Research for Life also gives access to books and journals by removing the paywall for content from over 200 publishers. There are 2,000 institutions across Africa that have registered for Research for Life, and this gives an indication of how many per country. So in some cases, Nigeria 330, Democratic Republic of Congo 84, Ghana 135, and so on. They're quite high numbers. This website you can go to and it will show you whether your institution is registered. If your institution isn't registered, then your librarian can apply to register. And this will basically give you free access. And I know that Susan's spoken to somebody at a university not that long ago, and they took steps to arrange access through this program. So it's something which you should take a look at, and it means that you may be able to access a lot of papers, books, journals, free of charge with no barriers at all. So again, Susan touched on this one. Just to reiterate, we do welcome people who are interested in joining editorial boards. Now, some journals are very selective. Social Science and Medicine is one where we are actively looking to recruit board members from Africa at the moment. And so if this is something of interest, we'd be very pleased to hear from you. Feel free to reach out. Susan also mentioned about early career boards. So some journals are actively recruiting for early career board members. If you see things like that, I strongly recommend that you apply. It can be competitive, but it's certainly something to look at and consider if it's something that you'd like to become involved with. Susan mentioned the last point as well, whether Carter or APHRC might be interested in doing a call for board members. If that's something that is of interest, that would be great to discuss further. So we'd be happy to speak to you about that. If you're interested in reviewing papers, you can actually volunteer to review. So if you go to the Reviewer Hub, there's a tab you can see on the right there, Volunteer to Review, and you can go and select which journals you're interested in reviewing papers for. Select you when they're looking for reviewers. There's no guarantee that you will get papers to review, but you don't lose anything by expressing an interest in registering. So if it's something you'd be interested in doing, then please feel free to go and register and express which journals you'd be interested in reviewing papers for. This is one of the training modules on Researcher Academy. So this is something which you may wish to have a look at. And obviously this is looking at peer review. And there's some additional courses listed here which might be of interest as well. So that's the last slide. I'm aware that there are some questions in the chat. Perhaps we should have a look through those, Susan. I'm going to stop sharing at this point, but we'll be very happy to answer any other questions that anybody may have.
Yeah, so I've been answering the questions in writing as you've been speaking. Marta, maybe you can respond to the question that's there about getting access to the webinar so that people can go through it more slowly. I just want to say two quick things and then keep answering questions for the time that's remaining. But one is, you know, becoming a reviewer is such a good opportunity for you, because I often tell the young people that I mentor the best way to learn how to write a good paper for an academic journal is by reviewing the work of others. And you don't know who they are, they don't know who you are. And there's so many resources on the Elsevier website that, it's really going to help you. It's not that you're doing a favor for someone else. You're actually going to help yourself in terms of your own writing skills by doing that. The last thing I wanted to mention is, I said this, I think, very quickly, but we do also publish special issues in the journal. And they all come through me as the editor-in-chief. But if you go on our website, there's actually a template for a proposal for a special issue. So you can A, see what's required, and B, think about, if you have an upcoming conference about a specific theme, for example, think about doing a special issue in the journal. If that's something you're interested in, reach out to me and we can have a conversation about it. We love to have some special issues. I know, for example, when I was at the Carta research meeting 2 Septembers ago in Johannesburg, I saw so many amazing papers being presented by young people. And I would go up to them afterwards and say, oh, I'd love to see this in social science and medicine. And they'd say, oh, well, I've already published it here, there, or wherever. So think about social science and medicine, but also think about that opportunity for guest editing a special issue in the journal. About, and Marta, I'll just plant that seed with you about the annual Carta conference, thinking about, could we do a special issue from the annual Carta conference in social science and medicine? That's something you and I can talk about offline, but we'll just keep answering questions. If one accepts to be a reviewer, do they get recognition for this on Web of Science? I think you can get recognition on your ORCID ID, can't you, Matt? Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that on ORCID ID. It's not linked to Web of Science, so that's completely separate. So no, it wouldn't be reflected there.
Yeah. These are all anonymous, I guess, but Africa contributes less than 5% to the publications. As editors-in-chief, how can we change this trend? We can change this trend starting right now, today. There were about 125 people on this call. What percentage of you will sign up to be reviewers, so that you can start to support your colleagues who are submitting work from SSA and helping them get published? I'm not suggesting that you write positive reviews of work that's not done well, but who would you rather have reviewing the work that's coming out of Sub-Saharan Africa? You want excellent scholars from Sub-Saharan Africa reviewing the work that's coming out of Sub-Saharan Africa. So what percentage of you will sign up as reviewers? What percentage of you will actually follow up and go on the Elsevier website and go through those tutorials on how to be a good peer reviewer? What percentage of you will start talking to your colleagues about submitting to journals like this one? And, going back to my personal objective for this webinar, you can all now say, I know the editor-in-chief of Social Science and Medicine, and she said they want more content from Sub-Saharan Africa. They know there's a lot of good work happening here, and we want to get it published. So part of it's on us, but a lot of it's also on you. And I hope that answers your question. Those are all the questions that are in the chat currently. Made to understand your journal dwells purely on social science and health. Does it cover artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, and health? If it's contextualized within social science theory, yes, but Elsevier has how many journals, Matt? 1,000, 2,000, 3,000?
Yeah, thousands. So, we would definitely have a home for research on those topics. Social science and medicine may not be the first place to submit if you're writing on that area, but you might want to try and have a look at Journal Finder. So the tool that I mentioned earlier.
I was just going to say, yeah. If you go to that Journal Finder and you put in the abstract of your paper, it will come up with a list of journals that are a good fit for that paper. The other, as Matt quickly mentioned earlier, when my students, write their papers in my HQP and they say, well, where should I submit this? The first thing I say is, look at your bibliography. where are you drawing work from to inform the work that you're doing? And you might see the same journal come up 4, 5, 6 times. You think, oh, okay, well, clearly that's a good outlet for my paper because that's the audience I'm writing for. Does the journal accept papers written in French?
No. We don't.
But I can tell you one that does.
Yeah, we don't accept, so social science and medicine doesn't accept papers in French or Spanish or Chinese. It is English language only. We do have other journals which are in the field which are French language. We don't have that, which Elsevier publishes, which are either French or dual language. But Susan may have some suggestions there as well.
I do. So I'm Canadian, and we have a national journal for our group because I'm a geographer by training, and I often say geography can be just about anything. Excuse me, but we have a national journal and we have 2 official languages in Canada, right? English and French, and we accept papers in both English and French. It's called Canadian Geographies. And we do actually publish quite a bit of work from our colleagues in Cameroon and Senegal and other French-speaking countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. So look up Canadian Geographies. I'm a geographer in Canada, and I'm linked to that organization, the Canadian Association of Geographers. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to the journal, or you can reach out to me directly.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat at the moment. Lots of thumbs up and applause. Anybody have any final questions? Or if not, I'll turn it back to Marta to close us off, maybe. Marta, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
There you are.
I was just looking through the chat, and as you're saying, there's nothing. I think you have addressed everything.
Yeah.
Either through the presentations or now in your answers or even writing. So thank you for being so on top of everything. I mean, this has been a fantastic webinar, really engaging. I'm really grateful to you, Susan, for reaching out to organize these. And I can say I've been looking at the participants, 116, I think, constant all through, a few moments, a few more. And this is not to be taken for granted, because it's not easy to get so many people at the same time available when this is happening. So just to reiterate, we will make the recording available, the resources. We will link also to the different resources that Matt has shared. And yeah, thank you too for dedicating the time. Thank you all the participants for staying with us. There's clearly an interest on this, and we will try and organize more events that may be on these topics. And yeah, see you
That's
next
great,
time.
Marta. And also, just to say, I know that the personnel, the Carta membership, turns over. So if you want us to do this again in another year and a half, we're very happy to do it again. My real objective, again, was that now if I run into anyone at a Carta meeting or any other conference and they walk up to me and say, I know you're the editor-in-chief of Social Science and Medicine, that really was my objective. But also just to try and unpack that black box of the publication process and remove some of the uncertainty, some of the fear associated with it. And I know too, a lot of the young colleagues who are on this call are part of the mentorship program within Carta. I know that I talk about these issues with my mentee. And so if you are part of the Carta mentorship program, talk to your mentor. Say, I learned all these things. How can I employ these things? There are simple questions like, how much time should I spend reviewing? I talk about that with my colleagues. What is our obligation to the peer review process? How many papers should I be reviewing on an annual basis? How much time should I give to this process relative to other things that are on my to-do list? Talk to your mentors about this. And I'm sure you'll hear from your mentors that this is a good thing to get involved in for your early career researchers. But yeah, take it to your mentors too.
And if I can just add one other thing, we would be happy to do this again. And if there is any interest from colleagues in individual universities and so on, feel free to reach out, because be happy to set something up if there's more interest from certain institutions, etc. So
very much so.
Thank you. Thank you. For sure. I think from APHRC, beyond the CARTA program, we have a few other programs that are starting with similar, where we are taking the CARTA model to try and apply it beyond the privileged CARTA fellows that have all the support through PhD and beyond. So we can see these applied for early career researchers and even mid-career researchers throughout the continent, and we will look for opportunities to create more content that can be shared online, or even synchronous sessions in which there can be more Q&A and engagement on the peer review process from the reviewer side. Which is also a whole other monster that has to be talked about on responsibility. Responsibility towards the community and the effort, as you're saying, Susan, that we all have to put in so that the systems keep running, and so that diversity in the editorial boards can also help increase the diversity of the publications that come through. So again, I can only say thank you a million times. I hope it has been useful for everybody. And see you next time. From our end, it has been a very interesting afternoon on this side, evening now. I hope you have a very good day on that side.
Thank you,
Susan. And thanks you,
Marta.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.